Team Kimi costs $15 per million output tokens. Claude costs $50, which is 3.3 times more expensive for what are honestly pretty similar core capabilities. And those numbers come straight from both platforms' published API pricing pages. Both models just got major updates, so the old takes are already stale. And I'm running Kimi and Claude through 5 real tests: web search, speed, multilingual, API pricing, and context window, where every number comes from published docs and third-party benchmarks with no vendor money and no spin. The price gap is obvious from the start. But what actually surprised me is where Claude fights back, and whether that fight back is worth 3.3 times your API bill, because that answer wasn't what I expected going in. So this comparison is for developers and teams picking a model for production apps or heavy research workflows, because if you're running thousands of API calls a month, the wrong choice costs you real money. And the gap between $15 and $50 per million tokens adds up way faster than you'd think. Test 1, web search. And look, if your model's search pulls stale or uncited sources, your users get wrong answers and you get the support tickets. Because bad citations don't just look sloppy, they break trust fast. So I wanted to see exactly how Kimi and Claude handle real-time web search and whether their source quality actually holds up. What surprised me is how different the approaches are, even though the end result looks similar. Kimi uses autonomous agentic RL, decides on its own when to search, and taps 100 plus verified sources, while Claude triggers search on demand through Bing, but has one thing Kimi doesn't, which is the ability to write code to filter results before they even hit the context window. Honestly, neither one is clearly better here. Kimi's curated source list is great for research that needs authoritative citations. Claude's dynamic filtering is really useful for developers who want to pre-process results programmatically, and I think a lot of people would be happy with either one, depending on their use case. I was expecting Kimi to edge this one out just on source volume, but Claude's filtering capability kept it even. So web search is a tie. Both models do it well, just differently, and the scoreboard stays at 0-0 with one test tied, which honestly feels right given how different the two approaches are. Test 2, response speed and slow time to first token, is one of those things that feels fine in a demo and it absolutely kills your product in production, because users drop off, your pipeline stalls, and if you're paying per token on top of that, you're burning money while you wait. I went through the published numbers, and here's what I found. Kimi's own API puts out 32.6 tokens per second with a time to first token of 207.7 seconds, which is honestly pretty slow, but Claude has no published speed figure at all for Fable 5. And Anthropic only recommends Haiku 4.5 for speed-sensitive work, so we're comparing a real number to a blank. I was expecting at least one published latency number from Claude, and there just isn't one. So you can't call a winner when one side hasn't shown their card. Speed is another tie with no points awarded to either, and that puts us at 0-0 with 2 tests tied, which is kind of wild given how much these two models differ on price. Test 3, multilingual. And if you're shipping a product to non-English users and your model degrades in Spanish or Hindi, your users just get a worse experience you might not even catch, because language quality gaps are the kind of thing that shows up in churn, not in your test suite. What surprised me is how transparent Claude is compared to Kimi. Claude has published zero-shot multilingual benchmarks across 14 languages, where Spanish hits 98.2% of English performance, Japanese is 96.7%, while Kimi mentions native Chinese support but has 0 published benchmark numbers for any language, so it's a total black box. To be fair to Kimi, it's built by a Chinese company and probably handles Chinese really well, and Claude's 96.9% Chinese score shows it's close too. But the gap here is really about what you can verify, because if you can't see the number, you can't plan around it. I was expecting Kimi to at least have some published language data, and it just doesn't. So Claude takes multilingual because it's the only one that actually shows you the numbers across 14 languages, putting the score at Claude 1, Kimi 0, 2 tests still tied, and transparency won this round, not necessarily raw performance. Test 4, API pricing, and this is where things get really interesting, because pick the wrong model for a high volume app, and your end of month bill is going to hurt. And the difference between two models at the same capability level can literally be the difference between a profitable product and a money pit. I pulled both published pricing pages, and the numbers aren't close. Kimi charges $3 per million input tokens and $15 per million output tokens. Claude charges $10 input and $50 output. That's 3.3 times more expensive across the board. And Kimi even has a cheaper coding model at 95 cents input and $4 output per million. All verified published prices, not estimates. To be honest, Claude's higher price isn't just greed. You're paying for Anthropic's safety research and a brand enterprises trust. And for some teams, that's worth it. But if you're running serious volume and the quality gap between the two is small, that 3.3 times cost difference is really hard to justify. I knew Kimi was cheaper going in, but seeing $15 versus $50 side by side is still kind of wild. So Kimi wins API pricing no contest, and that ties the overall score at 1-1 with 2 tests still tied. Test 5 context window and file processing. And if you're feeding a model a big code base or a stack of PDFs and it hits a limit you didn't know existed, your whole pipeline breaks. Because silent context truncation is a nightmare, and unclear file upload limits mean you're guessing at what your model can actually handle in production. Both models support a 1 million token context window via API, so they're identical on that front. But Kimi goes further and documents exactly what you can upload. 50 files at once, each up to 100 megabytes, supporting PDF, Word, Excel, images, and even video, while Claude's file handling specs are just not published anywhere I could find. Now, Claude can fetch long web pages directly via URL, which is a solid workaround for some document workflows. And the 1 million token window is the same on both sides. So for pure text work, you're getting the same capacity either way. But the real difference is how predictable your file workflow is when you're planning a production build. I was expecting Claude to at least have some file upload docs, and it just doesn't. So context window is a tie because both hit 1 million tokens, but Kimi's documented file limits give it a practical edge for document-heavy work, and the final scoreboard lands at Kimi 1, Claude 1, 3 tests tied, which is a lot closer than the price gap made it look. Kimi wins on price, and it's not close. $15 per million output tokens versus $50 is a 3.3 times gap that compounds fast at scale. It taps 100 plus verified sources in its agentic search, and it's the only one with clearly documented file uploads at 50 files, 100 megabytes each, right there in the docs. Claude wins on multilingual transparency with published benchmarks across 14 languages, Spanish at 98.2% and Japanese at 96.8% of English performance. And it also has dynamic search filtering where it writes code to pre-process results before they hit the context window, which is a genuinely useful feature Kimi just doesn't have. Honestly, I went in thinking Claude would pull ahead more clearly on quality, and the overall score ended up 1-1 with 3 ties. So here's the decision rule. If you're running high-volume API calls and multilingual coverage isn't your main concern, go Kimi, because $15 versus $50 is your answer. And if you're shipping to a global audience and need verified language benchmarks, Claude is worth the premium.